Thanos is Marvel's ultimate villain thus far, and he's ranked at or near the top of seemingly everyone's favorite villain list. But whether or not he's your favorite villain, it can be debated that Marvel viewed Thanos as the ultimate baddie of their first 3 phases of the MCU. After watching Endgame, I was inspired to do a bit of a deep dive into the character to analyze what made him so effective as a villain and how the character turned out to be much more than most expected. The best place to start is 2014's film Guardians of the Galaxy. Technically, we had seen Thanos in the post-credit scene of the 2012 film Avengers, but there he was just a concept more than anything, and he kind of looked like Ivan Ooze, so yeah. But in Guardians of the Galaxy, we got our first real taste of Thanos, and it was great. He looked ruthless, he obviously provoked an incredible amount of fear out of anyone who followed or dared to challenge him, but in hindsight he appeared fairly comic booky and one note. This wasn't the Thanos that we'd come to know though. This was again just a concept for a character that ended up with way more depth and development than any of us had anticipated. Thanos was always teased as Marvel's ultimate baddie. There's a lot of references to that through Easter eggs, referential lines, post-credit scenes, you name it. Thanos was always intended to be the big baddie of this generation of the MCU. Leading up to the release of Infinity War, we as an audience knew very little about him. We knew he was a powerful warlord and that he had 2 daughters in Nebula and Gamora, but that was basically it. The trailers for Infinity War didn't show us much aside from Gamora telling us that Thanos planned to collect the Infinity Stones to balance the universe by wiping out half the life within it. I think this worked well because unless you were an avid comic book reader, you probably didn't know much about Thanos besides his end goal. Going into Infinity War, my expectations were still very high though, because this was the villain our Avengers have been built up all these years to face. He needed to deliver in expected ways and also unexpected ones as well to satisfy heavily invested fans like myself. In many ways, Infinity War is Thanos' movie. The film jumps around from character to character a lot, but Thanos has more screen time than any other character, and the story focuses on his personal quest for balancing the universe more often than anything else. Long before Infinity War, many have argued that the MCU had a villain problem. There were a lot of lackluster villains that had some cool moments here and there, but mostly proved to just be a villain for our heroes to defeat by the end of the movie. Aside from Loki, of course, who is my personal favorite, but this problem was addressed before Infinity War even hit theaters. Vulture was good in Homecoming, Hela was good in Ragnarok, and Killmonger was good in Black Panther. But Infinity War is a very different film than those 3, and it took an approach that was totally brand new for the MCU, and that is making the villain the main character and central focus of the story. That would seem like an incredibly dangerous proposition to any studio, but Marvel clearly felt their characters were established enough to pull this off, and with good pacing, they could create something fresh. Thanos is different than any other Marvel villain to date because he became the main character of a film. I think this in part made him the best villain the MCU has seen thus far because he received more development and screen time than the other villains, besides Loki of course, who has appeared in multiple films for extended periods of time. Much of Infinity War though focuses on Thanos' motivations for doing what he's doing. The film discusses how his home planet is now a wasteland and how he partially feels responsible for its failures. It discusses how he believes his destiny is to be the savior of the universe despite only a few believing in his vision, and it focuses on his successes and failures as a father figure and how he believes his efforts went largely unappreciated. While other Marvel villains have been able to explore somewhat similar themes, they weren't able to do so with the depth that Thanos was able to. I in large part contribute this to a dedication to delivering a villain that was worth the 10-year build-up and anticipation. Thanos had not only to be the most powerful villain the MCU has seen thus far, but he also had to be at least one of its most dynamic villains as well. A villain that just wants to destroy half the universe to show he can is not that interesting, but a villain that believes his destiny is to save the universe by committing genocide on a massive scale is. Thanos is a character like some of the best villains out there that you don't empathize with, but you do sympathize with, at least in some ways. I think the best example of this is when he's explaining what happened on Titan. While his plan is barbaric, he felt he was offering a solution that could save the planet from certain destruction. Then we find out that they called him a madman and Titan soon was no more. I think the creative choice that I like best with this scene was when Thanos is telling Doctor Strange that the hardest choices require the strongest wills, and you can see a slight tear in his eye. How often do we see a villain that vulnerable, willing to share that much about his failures and sacrifices and how they've motivated him? One of the reasons Thanos wins this war is because he will literally do whatever it takes to win. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, he believes his destiny is to correct the universe and he will do whatever it takes to make it happen. The Avengers in Infinity War don't show that same level of determination. They want to save the world, but they're not willing to sacrifice whatever they need to in order to do so, because they haven't been required to with previous threats. But Thanos isn't your typical threat. He's stronger, has more resources at his disposal, and is that much more determined to achieve his goal than any other MCU villain thus far. Speaking of sacrifice, let's talk about Gamora. Gamora's role in the MCU has been exclusively limited to the Guardians up until Infinity War, and while her past history with the Mad Titan Thanos has been referenced a few times before the events of Infinity War, that's all it was. Well, in Infinity War, we get a glimpse of what their relationship is like. Thanos thinks he's been the perfect father and turned her into the fiercest woman in the galaxy. Gamora thinks he's an abusive nutjob who made her life a living hell. What's most interesting about their relationship, though, is that we learn that Thanos genuinely does care for her. You could make the argument that he saw her ferocity as a child that day on her home planet and he thought he could exploit that for his own benefit, but I think it's at least mildly suggested that he was showing compassion to her. This scene was brief but did a lot for Thanos as a character, because it shows that he's not purely a monster. He can show compassion. He's capable of it. He just is principled and sees himself as a savior that will do whatever it takes to fulfill his purpose. The scene with Gamora on Vormir takes this a step further. As Gamora believes Thanos is a sociopath who loves nothing, it turns out there is at least one thing he loves, and that's Gamora herself. As he sacrifices Gamora, you can see the anguish in his eyes. This again is not the type of vulnerability that many villains in comic book movies show. Once Thanos actually pulls off the snap, you see this again. Gamora asks him how much it costs, and he tells her everything. Thanos in this scene is emotional. He's won, but it's bittersweet because it cost him everything that mattered to him. I again want to emphasize Thanos' determination, because his commitment to a purpose is unwavering, and it's something that plays a large part in raising the stakes to as high as they've ever been in the MCU. An aspect of Thanos' character that we all knew was coming was his strength. As I mentioned earlier, Thanos has long been teased as the ultimate villain of the MCU. Many of the characters who know he exists fear him, and many fans know at least a little bit about his comic book roots. I think the expectations going into Infinity War were that Thanos was going to kick some serious ass, but I don't think I personally expected him to be quite as powerful as he was. One reason for this is that I didn't expect him to actually retrieve all the stones by the end of Infinity War. I expected him to maybe grab a few, and then Endgame would be his pursuit to grab the rest, where he would fail. But still, it can't be overlooked that even with only one stone in the gauntlet in the opening scene of the film, he still made very quick work of Hulk, a character that we've known up until this point as maybe the strongest character in the entire MCU up until Infinity War. His defeat of Hulk, his manhandling of Thor, and the killing of Loki very quickly establishes Thanos as a threat unlike anything the MCU has ever seen, a force that will push the Avengers to their limits and then a little bit further. I think the battle on Titan, where Thanos makes work of both the Guardians and a few of the Avengers, is probably the best indication of his strength. I think this is one of the best fight scenes in the entire MCU, because we see some remarkable displays of power from Thanos and everyone else there. Thanos using the stones and his brute strength to destroy the Guardians and Avengers was crazy to watch, especially his 1v1 with Iron Man. Iron Man throws his most powerful creation to date at Thanos with all his powerful weaponry, and all he does is draw blood. Thanos destroys Iron Man's suit and then almost destroys Tony himself until Doctor Strange steps in. The trade they make is also emblematic of how Thanos is a man of principle. He doesn't really want to kill anyone he doesn't have to. He kills Loki because Loki tried to kill him in front of the Black Order, and he's prepared to kill Tony because he views Tony as maybe the greatest single threat to him fulfilling his destiny. Otherwise, he just wants the stones and will let fate decide who lives and who dies. He wants the process to be as dispassionate and fair as possible. Ultimately, Thanos proved to be everything I was hoping for and then some. While I found Endgame Thanos to be a slight downgrade for the character, I still believe Thanos is Marvel's best villain to date, from an objective standpoint. I'll always favor Loki, but I can't deny that Thanos offers it all. He's formidable, well-developed, and pulled off feats that are unlike anything we've ever seen before from a character in the MCU. He was teased since 2012, and the fact that he even lived up to expectations, let alone surpassed them, is remarkable. I'm actually upset we didn't get to see more of him in the MCU, but we may see him again, who knows. With the Pandora's box that's been opened with time travel and possibly the multiverse, anything is possible really. Nonetheless, Thanos is excellent in every aspect. He's Marvel's ultimate villain.